I believe that love is a form of leadership.
Yes, it is.
And when you talk about that at the workplace, people might squirm a little bit. It's like, oh, is that a liability to talk about love at the workplace? For the men that I realized already saw the world this way, it gave me so much hope. If we want men to feel less lonely at scale, we need the men who are already doing the work and already seeing the world this way to be less alone. The work will never be sustainably funded if it's not understood and valued, but we need to build organizations and institutions that are both financially rich and emotionally rich. If men are not able to cultivate the skills for modern leadership and brave new modern leadership that we need, and women are not able to create the space for them to have those, then the core things that we need as human beings, which is safety and opportunity, we're not going to have.
Before we dive in, a word from our presenting sponsor, BetterHelp. The name of this show is Real Love Ready. And I genuinely believe that readiness comes from doing the work. For a lot of people, that includes therapy. BetterHelp makes it accessible by providing licensed therapists online whenever you need it. Head to betterhelp.com/loveready for 10% off. That's BetterHelp.com/loveready. All of the work that we're doing around the Real Love Ready series and as a company with Real Love Ready is talking about love in all its forms. We've talked about relationships, intimate partnerships, friendships, and today is a big conversation, a broader conversation, and really talking about love and how it shows up in the workplace, in our culture, in the media. Janna M. Turner spent 20 years building power for women, shaping cultural narratives for brands like Estée Lauder and the WNBA. And then she had a reckoning. The powerful women she had been building up were going home to men who were not growing alongside them. And she decided that was her problem to work on. Today, she's the CEO of Antenna Up, a platform of summits and community infrastructure designed to send new signals about the health and well-being of American boys and men. She created the Marketing to Men Summit, the Healthier Men at Work Summit, and Buoys Club, a 700-member ecosystem of leaders working to build a world where men are as capable of connection as they are of success. Today's conversation taught me a lot. And that's what I just so appreciate about the work that we're doing here. So I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. I'm very happy to be joining with you, Janna. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me here. I'm really excited for this conversation.
Me too. When our mutual friend told me about you and invited you into this series and explained the work that you're doing, it was just a perfect marriage for talking about love and bringing the foundations of love around the conversation of infrastructure, around business, around how we're connecting in the workplace. And you have a background in PR and marketing and how the cultural narrative is like how men are being marketed and how they're supposed to be in the workplace. It's not about connection. So you're doing the work, Janna. You're doing amazing work.
Thank you. Thank you. It can be.
Yeah.
It can be about love and connection. And it ultimately is, right? We know that it is. It's just that it's sometimes called something different or approached differently or packaged or presented and framed a little differently.
Yes. So let's start from your professional background and how you were working, diligently and so hard with women and building women up. And then how it just kind of teetered over into the men's world, which includes women. I just think your story is quite remarkable. Please share.
Yeah, I think also in learning about your work, I think for so many women, it was very obvious to us that women's thriving leadership was not being actualized, right? And so any of us who had any sort of perspective and desire to help others, we're like, let's do this, right? Let's women come together and lift each other up. And
I have a team of women. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I started my first business when I was 23 in 2006 here in New York City. We were a PR firm called Style House, and we were for female-forward brands on a mission, which back in the mid-2000s was seen as very niche.
Yes.
I also came of age during this rapidly changing media and marketing landscape, how we get information, right? Like with Estée Lauder, we were one of the first outside agencies that was allowed to own a Lauder social media channel.
Wow.
It was
Yeah.
so frontier, right?
Big
And so
time.
because of that, not only were we connected directly to consumers and understanding what made people excited about brands or products, but more importantly, we were brought in by companies to help them engage more authentically and
Mm-hmm.
empathically with the women and girls that they were serving.
Right.
And,
With your customers.
marketers and brand people, advertisers will often say, we're targeting X, Y, and Z. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we need to say that, right? But we would say, well, you're actually serving women and girls. So how
Yeah.
are you doing that, right? It's a privilege, especially when there's so many things one can buy. The other part of the love conversation is that running a public relations firm is a lot like professional ego management, right?
Yeah. No matter where you go.
Well, you know what it is that we as human beings, we all have an ego
Yeah.
by virtue of being human,
Oh, for
right?
sure.
And our ego can make us act like a blowhard sometimes, and it can also keep us small and unclear on what we actually want or what's really going to satisfy us. So I always give the example that you'd ask a client in PR, what does success look like? And they'd say, being in the Wall Street Journal. You say,
Yeah.
okay, what does the story say that we did? And how will it ultimately impact the business? Because if ultimately what they're really excited about is having their name sketched out in the Wall Street Journal pencil or whatever that is, which is okay, right? But let's say that that's a dream for me,
Yeah.
right? Then once we get that for them, it's always going to be like, what's next? What's next? What's next? And as a business person, I also knew that unless our work was delivering against the success metrics, it wasn't going to continue being funded, right?
Yeah.
So it was really important to me to get on the same page with what success looks like. I ran that for 15 years. I managed a team of 7 to 9 people and 10 to 15 clients at a time from the time I was 23 until I was 38.
Wow.
And my son is 11 now. And there came a point, as many professional people do, where it was like, okay, I need to recalibrate a little bit. I can't do the work that I want to do, that I really enjoy doing, be the manager and leader of work that I want to be, and be the person that I want to be. So that recalibration resulted in what I call a little bit of my in-between before starting Antenna Up. And during that time, I started coaching leaders through a framework that I call personal brand alignment. So we talked about ego, right? So now I just get to work much more intimately with the egos of leaders and figuring out really what, for the sake of this conversation too, I think it's good for me to define how I define the ego. I mentioned that it can keep us small just as much as it can make us, need to be right all the time or whatever that is. I tend to think about Eckhart Tolle's definition of the ego, which is really the vision that we have in our head when we think of myself, me, the story of me. And another helpful piece that applies so much to the work that we're doing now with to rebuild and restore trust and respect between men and women. Anytime that you feel inferior or superior to anybody else, that's your ego.
That's your ego. It's like there's so much overlap with the conversations we have at Real Love Ready. And I know there's divine intervention with all of this. Just because, Terry Real, we were with him in Boston 2 days ago, and he said, if you're in the one up or the one down position, we're meant to be, right here.
Yeah.
We're equals.
Exactly.
And so that's the ego. When you're in either one of those. Yeah.
Exactly. And none of this is to shame or blame any of us,
No,
right?
no.
This is that we all have an ego by virtue of being a human being.
Yes.
I also became a mother to a son.
Yeah.
And there is nothing like spending time with a baby and a boy and parenting, seeing my husband turn into a father, and then of course dealing with caregiving of parent, all these different pieces, to be like, oh, dang, we're all just human beings trying to figure this out. And also, clearly boys are multidimensional human beings that if boys are not expressing themselves and allowed to be the full picture of what it means to be a human, that's not only hurting them, but it's hurting society.
Yes.
And I grew up in girl power era. I was born in 1983, so I'm a millennial.
Yeah.
And I was told to break stereotypes, that I could be anything I wanted to be, and that the world was my oyster. Our male counterparts did not necessarily get that memo for themselves. let alone how do we recalibrate as a society when, it's one thing to not know how to or have the tools to handle everyday stress and anxiety, right? We all are working to regulate and understand what it means to be in a human body. But what about like existential changes in power and status and money and opportunity? And, so much of our work is about that we don't need to admire the problem anymore. Like we are where we are because of all these different factors. So how do we position the opportunities that exist then? And that's when we come to connection and love.
How do we position the opportunities? Ooh, I like the way you said that.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've described a moment of seeing that the powerful women you were building up were going home to men who weren't growing alongside them. Were you seeing that, Janna?
Yeah, I have to say in the workplace too.
Yes.
For a very long time when I was doing my coaching, before I started working with more and more men, which I did when I started doing the coaching professionally, the personal brand alignment work. But it started by a lot of women's male colleagues, like really not understanding their superpowers, not understanding how to work well together and get the best work out of them. And a lot of time and emotional labor being put on women and people of color in workplaces to accommodate. And from a business standpoint, purely, like we can talk about the feelings around that and the energy around that and psychological safety. But from a business standpoint, that is lost productivity, that is hurting revenue, that is hurting retention, right? People don't quit their jobs, they quit their bosses and their colleagues because they don't want to be in those environments. So working with women who had really toxic bosses, who, it was like, oh, you're my work wife. It's like, ooh, but like, there's a lot of things that were ultimately hurting a lot of folks. And the more I worked with men in corporate America, tender-hearted, like amazing men who loved their job, loved their family, were excited to be doing the work they were doing, but also a lot of these systems within the organization and the broader invisible ones, patriarchy, misogyny, white supremacy, still limiting their potential too. And them not being able to talk about it because either there was a stigma on one side or, how dare you center yourself when everyone is suffering right now? Which, goes into the zero-sum thinking that, gains for some are losses for others, or, we grew up hearing you can't be what you can't see, right? That applies to men and boys too. And we hear, none of us are free until all of us are free. That applies to men and boys too.
Yeah. So how did you end up pivoting from your PR firm to creating Antenna Up?
Yeah.
How did that even, because Antenna Up is men focused, is helping build men up in the workplace. And tell us about that pivot.
Yeah. So the North Star mission of Antenna Up is to rebuild trust between men and women at scale so that we can all work better together. Now, there are precursors to that. And the precursors to that are wide, and I am not going to be able to articulate all of them here. One of them, though, is men seeing themselves as stakeholders in their own health and well-being, which makes less work for women and people of color.
Okay.
As a result, also men seeing themselves as not allies to women, allies to women and people of color, but as stakeholders. Both because you don't really do anything unless you know what's in it for you. And also because it's true.
Yeah.
We are all connected.
Yes.
And
we have to, there has to be an interdependence. This is how the world works.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So Antenna Up is focused on culture and narrative change and doing that through a few different angles. And I think, to bring us back to how you opened, right? That the crisis of connection is not personal or individual. There are personal and individual things we can do. But the crisis, if you want to call it that, of what we are in and why love feels so hard to people today is because the infrastructure has never really been built for relational intelligence for men and boys especially, but even in American culture. It's kind of antithetical to a lot of the ways that we live and operate, whether we fully realize it or not.
Wow. So how did you come up with the idea of Antenna Up? And what does it mean?
So your antenna is up. When your antenna is up, it's about what you're paying attention to. And it's also the signals that you're sending and receiving.
Yeah.
Energetically, with your communication. We all have our own way of seeing the world, but how are we communicating that to other people? One of the core tenets of my personal brand alignment work is that the onus is on us to be understood for who we are in the world, right? Which requires communication. Also requires knowing yourself.
Right.
Which is hard work. That's the work we're all doing as people.
Like Janna, right there. So when you're doing this personal branding with corporate executives, is that what you'd say? Like most of your customers, your clients? It's like a lot of this introspection and like getting to know, which I've done a lot of this stuff, and I'm sure you have too. Like women and women my age, like a lot of us have done this work. I've been doing inner growth work for decades, but have men really been doing that? Maybe.
So the answer is that they have been more than people think.
Okay, yeah.
And that is part of what gives me hope.
Great.
That's part of why this work is really hope-inducing. And it was, there were a lot of these kind of dichotomies, like I said, right? It's, there's not really a space for men to talk about these very real realities of being a human being in the world today and showing up at work or at home to a very different world, but without a playbook.
Right.
Which goes into media and advertising and the way that we are represented in our heavily mediated world.
Oh, big time. I mean, everybody's got their phones. We all do.
Exactly.
Our kids do. It is. And so the media side of this, your company also focuses on.
Exactly. So if we want men to see themselves differently in context, we have to meet them where they are, and shame and blame don't work. We need to call men into healthier conversations. So the two main levers that Antenna Up uses to do that are the narrative change vehicles through the summits that you mentioned. So we have a marketing to men platform where we bring together brands, advertisers, and media. We have this radical thesis that men are fully multidimensional human beings. And
radical.
And that there's a big unlock opportunity to market to them as such.
Wow. Because traditional media is not, right? They're marketing, tell us what, you think I laughed because it's kind of laughable.
To break stereotypes. We've been taught to break stereotypes our whole life. And even if men were told that they should, or that's maybe they've idolized people who've done that, it's still really hard. And it goes back to the policing that, men kind of do of each other in society, which I learned that more and more men knew was not serving them, knew they were lonely, weren't sure what the answer was, and didn't know who to talk to about it.
Wow.
And you can say, oh, boohoo men, like the world was designed by and for men. That doesn't mean that it's serving them. That doesn't mean that these systems are encouraging human thriving. And
there's so many, there's going to be so many quotes this is about human thriving.
It's about human thriving.
I know.
And that's why one of the things when you say, what does Antenna Up do? And I say narrative, it's like this invisible work, right?
Yeah.
But we are the connective tissue for the conversation. So
yes.
When I say that, we are positioning even just the concept of compassion for boys and men.
Yes.
As something that is not just safe and palatable, but compelling and imperative and is everyone's business.
Yes.
And at the same time, that human rights, human flourishing, the brave new leadership that we need right now in our world.
So what does that look like, the brave new leadership?
Well, it's a great question because that's why I was so excited to talk to you, because I believe that love is a form of leadership.
Yes, it is.
And when you talk about that at the workplace, people might squirm a little bit. It's like, is that a liability to talk about love at the workplace? Or even, talking about the idea that you want your employees to be embodied, right? Like you want them to be in their body and in their power. But even the concept of embodied is like, ooh, is that safe for work?
Oh, yeah.
So part of our job is de-risking these conversations, both culturally and financially, for people that will leverage their power and influence to make change.
Did you say de-risking?
De-risking.
Okay. So what does that mean?
Well, there's a lot of fear.
Yes.
Fear is the opposite of love. Right? And I want to go back to love as a form of leadership.
Yes, please.
Because the word itself, like I said, can make people...
They're like, give me a break, right? Kind of that
exactly.
eye rolling.
Exactly. Okay, so what does that look like in action then?
Mm-hmm.
It looks like being curious.
Yep.
It looks like being creative. It looks like asking questions and listening to the answers and asking follow-up questions and doing the work to determine how you show up in the world, how that impacts the people around you, how the people around you impact you and your own behavior. And as I go back to these relational skills that, again, our culture doesn't necessarily promote, especially for men and boys. There haven't been the invitation, the permission to do these things. And then we're surprised when men don't have these skills and, women are like, how am I supposed to date right now? Or men don't even have friends because of very old vestiges of homophobia that keep men from expressing care and love for each other, even outside of work. Yeah. It also stops them from getting colonoscopies, which is killing men at younger ages.
Like the list goes on.
The list goes on. And we have to use humor because that's how we make a human.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
But so to continue this thread of love as a leadership skill and what that looks like, it also looks like you get new information, and you process that, and you do something with that information. Right? That's how you show accountability. That's how you show responsibility. And that's how you build respect and trust between anyone that you want to engage with.
So can you give me an example of that in action? So what are you talking about when you're saying you're given new information? Like somebody sends an email or like tell me what that means. Like,
well, I think a lot of business leaders in 2020 had a moment where they were like, oh, wow, I totally operate within white supremacy. And I did not even know that. And we can cringe, right? We can be like, oh God, I feel so bad about myself. And this goes back to the Terry Real thing, either oh, I'm putting myself down here.
Yeah.
Or there's, defensiveness and, how was I supposed to know that? Or, so it's sitting in discomfort, which is not comfortable.
Yeah. The accountability piece is huge.
Yeah.
That right there is an act of love.
Taking accountability. The other piece of it is that taking care of yourself is an act of love, especially if you're a leader, especially if people are depending on your health and well-being for their livelihood, your emotional health and well-being and your physical health and well-being.
Yes.
So that is an act of love. It is the least selfish act of love that you can do. It's people say meditating is the least selfish act of love that you can do because you spread that out to the world. Beyond that, beyond men uplifting themselves and each other to engage in their own health and wellness, mental, physical, emotional, spiritual, leadership today also includes preventing violence against women and girls and people of marginalized identities, all forms of violence, violent words and violent acts.
Exactly.
And for the men that I realized already saw the world this way, it gave me so much hope. Because I was like, these guys are doing the work. And if we can get them together, what magic will happen from that?
Right.
And so that's what we did.
Wow. This was your summit.
Well, the first was Buoys Club.
Oh, yes. So what is Buoys Club?
So it's not a boys club. It's a Buoys Club.
Yeah. It's funny because in Canada we say boys.
You would say buoy for B-O-U-S.
For the floaty. Yeah.
In Europe too.
Exactly.
Yeah. So if men are drowning, if all of us are drowning as in society, we need buoys. But also, Buoys is not where someone comes to present or to showboat or to talk about their work and try to get more business. Buoys Club is a group of now 700 leaders who are uplifting the health and well-being of American boys and men in their various spheres of influence. It's 80% male, but it's not just men. It's boy moms like us.
Yeah.
It's women that work in male-dominated industries and are just like, oh gosh, the men are not okay.
Yeah.
And they're intrigued by the work. They're like, do these men exist? I'm like, yes, they do.
Yes.
See.
Yeah.
What we have done through Buoys Club, we go back to love as an act of leadership, is really creating a container for these relationships to happen and modeling what collaboration looks like over competition, or when is the right time to compete and when is the right time to collaborate. We talked about ego a lot, right? With Buoys Club, we say, how do we go from an ego system to an ecosystem? A thriving, world-changing ecosystem.
Yes.
Which I don't know if you feel this, but like when I talk about this with women and people of color, they just like take a big sigh.
Yeah.
Like, oh, like men are going to do that themselves. And I'm like, yes, they are, but they also need our support.
Yes, of course.
And we also have to have compassion and empathy because that is love in leadership, right? So what Buoys Club looks like is both community building and connecting for guys that are in the work of men's work, which is lonely. It is exhausting. It is thankless. We are all so far ahead of our time. All of us are. I mean, it's inherently lonely. You know that. It's also kind of actually like teaching how to collaborate. Like, oh, you're really good at this thing. You need to talk to this guy who's really good at that thing because neither of you are expected to be good at all the things.
No, but I think that is something that leadership is so misunderstood, right? And when I know me, like I'm a business owner, it's just like, I thought I had to know it all. And then I was like, I learned, as you do, you're like, as if. Yeah. I'm only good at these, these things. Like, that's it, and they're good, but I need all these other things to make the business thrive and to grow. Yeah. And so there's all these amazing people that have this, you have this gift, these talents. And of course, you have to bring in other people that have, that's what collaboration is. That's what team is.
As women, though, we have had better models of what that looks like in society. We have modeled it in events like you do, in formal and informal women's communities, in our own communities, in our neighborhoods.
For sure. With women, we're great with picking up the phone, asking for help.
We haven't always been and we aren't always.
Yes.
But there is a combination of an expectation as well as a kind of natural understanding that that's our role, that we are, there to lift the world up around us. And so the idea of being a buoy, right? A buoy is both a noun and a verb, right?
Yes.
Because our job as Antenna Up, Buoys Club is our community building ecosystem for the work, right? How do we make this work understood, valued? Like if we want men to feel less lonely at scale, we need the men who are already doing the work and already seeing the world this way to be less alone. And the work will never be sustainably funded if it's not understood and valued. And if it's perceived that anything that is invested in, whether that's money or attention, in men and boys is somehow taking away from other folks who by and large are also hurting right now.
Yeah.
So it's not either or, it's both and. And that is our work with the Antenna Up Fund, which is what runs Buoys Club, is to buoy the buoys, right?
To buoy the buoys.
So the mandate of the Antenna Up Fund is to build community for men's work leaders across the country and to amplify their voices. Because you can't be what you can't see. Our boys need role models, but so do our husbands and so do our dads even. They can be inspired by the next generation of men who are doing things differently. And that's actually, it was working with investors and white male billionaires who on paper, you'd be like, they have everything. But still these underlying feelings of not enoughness, of, scarcity, which again is in the water in our country. This is not to blame anybody, but this is to say that we think that everyone else has it figured out, or we think that everyone has more privilege or whatever than we do. But even guys that could write big checks to companies were like, they never call me for my advice. And I have a lot of wisdom to share with them. I ran businesses and I've done this before. And they just call me for a check.
Oh, yeah.
And as a mom, that's hard.
Yeah.
That probably feels really crappy. And so a lot of, we say, going from an ego system to an ecosystem. But it's also about this relational intelligence that is about moving from being transactional to being transcendent.
Yes.
Right? That we can meet and not have an agenda and not know exactly what's going to come out of it. And really have no idea how we're going to make money doing this.
You know what's so funny about this, Janna? Funny, I love the miracles in the world and the universe. I was talking to Maya, our communications director, today about this morning. I was like, we're doing this intentionally, right? We talk about how Real Love Ready. I mean, we have to walk the walk, and I want our company to be it's about love. If we're not being loving in the way we do business and with each other and all the things, well, then what business are we in to actually teach or even promote relational literacy, right? And I was saying how it's just I know that we're doing business differently. We're doing it through love. And you know what that means? That means that actually, I don't have all the answers. Half the time, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. But I'm like, but this feels right. Okay, take that step.
Yeah.
And then you have to get creative. Ask people around us. Okay. And what's the strategy? I'm not sure yet, but I'll let you know when I do. Do you have any ideas?
Exactly.
But that doesn't mean we're not doing great things. It doesn't mean we're not on the right path. But it doesn't always have to be like, I don't know the plan yet about like, even 2 years down the road, right?
Exactly.
I have a dream, but it might actually materialize differently.
Right.
So you really have to be more open and more present to the circumstance you're in now, even in business, right?
100%.
Yeah.
So
that's very different than doing business like traditionally.
Well, exactly. When we say traditional business, who was that done by?
By men.
Right. And men are not very comfortable saying that they don't have the answer. They're not really comfortable asking for directions. I mean, no, men are not a monolith, but they're not comfortable going to a doctor to be like, hey, I haven't been well. What do you think's going on with me?
Yeah.
And at work, men don't use healthcare benefits, mental health or physical health. They think it's somehow admitting a weakness or a deficit, which we all know it's not. We all know that those are the tools that make you an excellent leader and that make people want to work with you and make people want to do business with you.
Yeah. And so you're working on the media side too, right? Because this is what...
So our two events, so we have the Marketing to Men Summit where we bring together brands, media, advertisers to, if you're marketing to men, if you're serving men, if you're communicating with men, what an opportunity to do so in ways that uplift their health and well-being, that help them feel seen and understood and valued and see safety and opportunity in the world for themselves, just like we all want.
Yes.
Right? And then our other platform, that is live now, we have lots of different culture change platforms that we'll be launching, is Healthier Men at Work. And it's not men at work, it's not healthy men at work, it's healthier men at work.
Mm-hmm.
Because everyone wants to be a little healthier.
Yeah.
Everyone wants things to be better, right? And Healthier Men at Work was the first conference that we know of, especially in America, connecting male worker health to business outcomes, like revenue and retention and risk reduction. The idea that if you're paying for benefits for men in your workforce, mental, physical benefits, and they're not using them because, again, men are not a monolith, but it's a meme at this point that men don't go to the doctor or go to therapy. A lot of men do go to therapy. They don't talk about it with their buddies. That's something we need to change. Side note. But as an employer, we're in America, our health insurance and our benefits are paid by our employers, or at least facilitated through our employers. They're not always paid by it. They're facilitated through employers. So the men are not necessarily using benefits that you and they are paying for. But then because these benefits aren't being used, you have like presenteeism, which is like kind of physically being at the office, but not actually like being
You're not there. You're not present.
And you're lacking emotional regulation. And so again, not to be too pithy or reductive, but companies are paying twice because the fact that men are not healthy, they're wreaking havoc on the workplace. Or at least if they're not wreaking havoc on the workplace, it's still a liability because sometimes your highest performers are the ones that like one day will burn out or have a heart attack. Men are dying from suicide, heart attack, colon cancer.
Loneliness. Yep.
If we're unpacking why we started with the two platforms that we started with, Marketing to Men is how men spend their money. Healthier Men at Work is how men make money. It's jobs, it's opportunity, it's economic opportunity. It's, seeing pathways for yourself of growth. And everywhere, but especially in America, our careers are so wrapped up with our identity and how we see ourselves. If we are not able to do our best work, we can't maintain a livelihood.
Yeah.
Right? So if men are not able to cultivate the skills for modern leadership and brave new modern leadership that we need, and women are not able to create the space for them to have those, then like the core things that we need as human beings, which is safety and opportunity, we're not going to have. And that creates fear, which is the underpinning of a lot of violence and a lot of division.
So that is when we talk about like our work, productivity, and feeling like, that is that right there is a human need.
Also safety, security,
yes,
economic security, financial security, especially when men are told from a very young age that their job is to be a provider and a protector. Now, providing what, protecting who and from what is what needs to be unpacked, and what so many of the men in Buoys Club are doing with their various platforms and influence. But safety and economic security are inextricably linked in the world today.
Yeah.
So we talk about jobs of the future, or people being, afraid of being replaced by robots. And that's the imperative to develop emotional intelligence. And, we talk about at Healthier Men at Work that we need to build organizations and institutions that are both financially rich and emotionally rich. And there's no choice there.
Right.
Like that's it.
Amazing. That's the conversation. I mean, I've never heard it said that way, but that is absolutely right.
We're partnering with brands and corporations who we know have a vested interest in being part of this conversation because it will positively impact their business in both financial and emotional ways.
Yes.
Think about very women-driven and women-led businesses. First of all, they're not going to be accused of being anti-woman, but what an opportunity to see men as a growth area.
Mm-hmm.
And to call men into those conversations. Yes. Also, I know that there are so many CEOs, COOs, CMOs, and coaches for those people who know that there's a business case here. And so our job as Antenna Up is to unlock that capital and to bring net new financial and cultural capital to this conversation so that these conversations are not happening instead of women's conversations and instead of conversations about oppression of people in color in our country.
Yes,
they're happening alongside the equity. Right. They're happening alongside the equity conversations.
Wow. Let's pause for a moment. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp, and I want to take a few seconds to talk about them. One of the things I keep coming back to in my own life and in many of the conversations we've had on this show is that a lot of us were never actually taught how to talk about what we feel or how we feel. We learn to manage, to perform, to keep things moving. But naming an emotion out loud, especially the hard ones, that is a learned skill. And for a lot of people, it doesn't get learned at home. Therapy for me has been one of the places I've learned how to actually build that vocabulary. It's where I've been allowed to slow down and figure out what's really going on underneath the surface. BetterHelp makes that work accessible. You fill out a short questionnaire, you get matched with a licensed therapist, and meet with them online, however works best for you, by phone, video, or messaging. And if the first match isn't quite right, you can switch. Whether you're someone who's been in therapy for years or who's never opened that door before, you can give it a look. Visit betterhelp.com/loveready for 10% off. That's BetterHelp.com/loveready. So something that Terry Real also said in our conversation, I'm telling you, these are all connected. Everybody, we're all connected.
We're all connected.
Because he's been doing men's work for his whole career. He started out doing men's work.
Yeah.
And he's still doing it. And he's like, it's a lot of work. Like women have been doing the work. We have been. Like I said, I read all these, I started reading all my books when I was, I think, 15. And everything just changed. But I was 15 years old and now I'm 48. I've been practicing this for a long time.
It's a practice, exactly. We know it's a practice.
Yes. And what Terry said is like the gap between where most men are with learning these skills about vulnerability and being open and being honest and transparent, taking risks like in vulnerability. He's like, there's a big gap. And so what men are being tasked with is a lot. It's not just change. What is demanded of men is transformation. And because it's such a big gap, we have to have compassion for that. I do. Like when it's vocalized that way, I understand that. I really do. But it's a lot of work, right?
Exactly. And there's no categorically good people or bad people. It's people that are doing the work and people that are not doing the work, right? Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, because I think people will be like, oh, is he a good guy? See, I heard he was a bad guy. And it's like, that binary does not serve us well, right? No. So I go back to, are they doing the work on themselves in the world, or are they not doing the work on themselves in the world?
Are they willing?
Are they willing? Even if they're not able yet, are they willing? Which goes back to the curiosity. And we also can't not talk about the climate in American culture over the last 10 years, especially with the Me Too movement, where all of a sudden men who have big, passionate opinions on things are afraid to share them because they might get canceled. Or they're like, I don't want to cause more harm. I'm just going to I thought I was just supposed to shut up and listen to you guys, right? Who am I to say anything? But you and I know the importance of someone like Terry Real, so many decades ago, publishing his book, I Don't Want to Talk About It, and not publishing it as Terry Real, but publishing it as Terrence Real.
That's right.
So people would know that he was a man. Because men's voices boom louder and men listen to other men. I don't have the data off the top of my head, but like women watch movies and read books written by and performed by men and women. But men, by and large, watch movies with star men and read books written by men. There are outliers. Men are not a monolith. But this is why better representation of the full multidimensional humanity of men and boys in media and culture and advertising and brand is a public health imperative.
Yes.
Because you can't be what you can't see. I will say it again and again and again. And so we need thousands of Terry Reals. We need thousands of the guys that are talking about this now because not every message is going to resonate with anyone. And because of where we are in our society, everything and anything that you do or say will be problematic to somebody somewhere.
Yes. And it's going to be on video.
So
it's going to be on phone.
Right.
It's going to be
But so like, are we just not going to talk?
Right.
Are we just not going to like, you know, people are like, oh, I'm not political. So you don't have opinions? I know you have opinions. You're a human being.
Yes.
Right? So Buoys Club is not necessarily a men's group, right? A lot of the men in Buoys Club lead men's groups. They're the ones that are creating spaces for men to say the wrong things and mess up and be held in brotherhood together and not be, you know, how dare you say that thing or whatever. What Buoys Club is a place to create infrastructure for that relational connective tissue that men need in our country to make change that ultimately creates less work for women and people of color, going back to the accommodations, the energy, the time, which breeds resentment. And it's a vicious cycle. And same, I am married to an incredible man, a more than most in the world. I actually told our son the other day, we had an example of a man behaving badly. And I said, you know, to be honest, there's more men in the world that are like that, unfortunately, than there are like dad. Like, that's why I'm married to him. That's why we're raising you differently, you know? And it's hard. It's hard. Parenting is hard. Being a person today is hard.
Yes.
But if we're not creating space for belonging, then we're never going to figure out all the insurmountable complex problems that we have.
I was saying this just yesterday at the Global Love Conference around like our challenges in the world, our challenges in love, relationship. These are human problems. These are human issues. And right now we're at a place in the world, in culture, where there's definitely so much, but we have to work together.
We have to work together.
We really do.
It's not easy.
This is collective. Yeah, I'm not saying this is, it's not easy. It's not just like, just put a whole bunch of love on it. I'm not that way. I'm very realistic about it, but I know the only way that we're going to get there is through love and through loving acts and through thinking lovingly, fierce compassion. It's honesty with respect.
One of the things I would often say in my personal brand alignment work is that there's always a way to say what you need to say in an authentic and effective way. Do I always choose that? No, I can't always muster it.
We're human beings.
But that's why we go back to intentionality. And if that is the goal, right? My friend Amanda Littman talks about responsible authenticity as an imperative for leadership, because we hear a lot of pithy statements like, oh, like bring your whole self to work.
Yeah.
Right?
No. Like,
well, first of all, that doesn't work for everybody.
Yeah.
And so it's, these the monolithic blanketed advice doesn't work. But also, we are going to act differently in different scenarios. And that's how it should be.
Yes.
That's okay.
I'm going to be different with you than I'm going to be with my little son, right? and with like, of course.
And I can say something reductive and totally binary and silly for a laugh with my girlfriends that I would never necessarily say around someone else, because it would be either offensive or it would just cause a division between us, right?
Yeah.
There's so many ways to be intentional.
Responsible authenticity.
I like that. Amanda Littman as a kind of requisite for modern leadership.
Yeah. So Janna, when we talk about a movement, like we're not in a movement yet with men's work. It's coming, right? Like,
it's coming.
But How do you see, like, how would we define, like, when you can see a movement happening?
It's really important to give credit where credit is due to some of the
Yes.
men in our country who've been doing this work since the 70s and 80s. And they had to ingratiate themselves to the feminist movement because they're like, are you coming for our resources? And like, how dare you center yourself when women are dying every day at the hands of men? And so this work has been being done for a very long time, but in a vacuum of community and resources. And it's also important culturally that many people who've been in the work for decades will tell you that it kind of comes in and out of vogue, literally and figuratively, every 5 years or so. That's how, and culture moves faster now than it ever did before, right? Our goal is that it sticks this time because enough men are righteously angry about that the systems are not serving them. There's men in Buoys Club who are ideating what a national men's movement, mobilization, organizing principles look like. And I love that for them because we all need it. And our promise to the world has been less work for women. At our Marketing to Men Summit, we had a whole day of like, how can we connect boys with their communities and how do we build great offline experiences for boys, like in sports and gaming or whatever, which is so important, right? And then we went into marketing to men as consumers, as leaders. And then we went into marketing to men as citizens, which was really about making it cool to care. Like, how do we market joining and participating to men, raising your hand, right? How do we market that?
Right.
And when I say marketing, I use it in both the traditional term because I am a marketer and I've been in public relations media most of my career. But marketing is ultimately about cultivating attention. And especially in the United States, money is not what's scarce. It's our attention that is scarce, our attention spans. And we're in our phones, as Paul Simon would say, and the people bowed and prayed to the neon god they made.
Wow, I've never heard this before, that it makes perfect sense to me that it's not money that's scarce, it's attention.
In my personal brand alignment work, my thesis is that everyone has a personal brand, whether you realize it or not. It's how you show up in the world. And if you want to get tactical and unpack what that looks like, you look at your 3 key buckets of resources. We have our time, we have our money,
your health,
relationships.
Oh yeah,
which are health. Health weaves through it all.
Yeah.
But how we wield these resources really impact our health, right? Attention is a subset of time. I start with time because time is the non-renewable resource. So is attention. It gets spent whether we decide how to spend it or not. What are you paying attention to? Money is more abundant than anyone thinks, especially in the United States. Doesn't mean that it's equally accessible or controllable. But relationships. I mean, so many of us, you cannot get to a certain age in your life and not sit and understand how the people are the fabric of your life. And that's the tapestry of who you are, right? And asking for help when you need it, offering help. I mean, even with money, are we charging too much? Are we charging too little and undervaluing our work? I mean, there's so many ways to play with these levers, right? I mean, I gave corporate keynotes on these things for 5 years. Antenna Up is really that work at scale. It's conscious leadership. It's how do we show up in ways that are aligned with both our personal brand and our institutional brand, because they're not at odds with each other. Going back to like people say they want you to bring your whole self to work, but do they really?
Yeah.
I don't know. But what if bringing your whole self to work means using different decision filters and customizing your defaults when it comes to how you've always done things? Be like, is this serving us? What do we want to keep? What do we want to change?
Yeah.
That's love as a form of leadership.
Yeah. So we've talked about love as a leadership skill. Break that down for the person listening who is in a relationship right now and struggling.
Yeah.
What does leadership look like in love? And why haven't most men been taught it?
Whew. I have to say, I'm not a therapist.
I know.
I'm not a therapist. My mother is a sociologist and my father is a media theorist, but I do not have those degrees myself. I am more someone who studies how money and power flow through the world and how we see ourselves in the world and how that impacts how we behave and show up in the world. So I'm Terry Real and Esther Perel, and there's so many people who will speak to this better than I can. But ultimately, we know that power sits in our own locus of control, right? What we can control, and not to be controlling, but how do I focus on what I can control?
Yeah.
We all know that the saying, 10% of life is what happens to you and 90% of it is how you respond to it, right? Not react, right? We say react is
respond,
right?
Not
But how do you
react.
respond? Part of what we can control is our presence.
Yeah. Be
where your feet are. It's a lot easier to have compassion and empathy in the moment when we're not in our own heads about what just happened or what's going to happen. I want to be clear, this is all easier said than done.
Oh, yeah.
Right? I feel like I have to say that all the time. But that is how we also channel what Marshall Rosenberg calls nonviolent communication, which is really speaking in the language of feelings and needs. I'm feeling this and I have a need for this, which is I statement. Right?
Yeah.
It's not I need you to.
Right.
It's, because
I am in my own power and
right. I'm feeling really tired and I have a need for clarity right now. Versus like, I don't understand anything you're saying.
Right. Right. Oh, see, these are this is a practice. This is why it's a practice.
It's a practice.
That's
it's a practice. And at work, it's saying something like, this isn't going to get the best work out of me if we're going to do it this way. The way to get the best work out of me is going to be to do it this way.
Yes.
And I also have to say that a precursor to that is knowing what that is, right? Knowing yourself. And this is why it all comes back to, if we want to rebuild and restore trust and respect between men and women, we need to get to know ourselves better, including men. And that's why I say when men see themselves as stakeholders and deeply invested in their own health and well-being, not for longevity to live forever, but to live a great life and to be part of the human flourishing and thriving that we all deserve and need in the world.
Wow. Love that. So, in your surroundings, I mean, you're with business people, you're with executives. Are you and were you, like maybe it's like both, but are you seeing there's like this gap at home? Like, women are just like, okay, you need to catch up, bud, or this isn't going to work.
Well,
right?
my dear friend Eve Rodsky wrote the book on this called Fair Play.
Yes.
And while, no system is perfect and everything needs to be somewhat customized to make it work for people, it absolutely changed this conversation.
Yes.
And even more exciting than that is that it changed the conversation for men, and that there are men on the internet now talking about the mental load, talking about, I used to think this, and now I realize this. And not being like, I'm such an idiot, I'm such a loser, how did I do that? But being like, okay, like, guess my job is to tell my buddies.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, like we got it wrong here.
And my job is to tell my son and my colleagues so that they can learn from my mistakes.
Yeah.
That's leadership. That's love as leadership for men.
Yeah. There's a man, Patrick Lentz. He's in my book because I was like, Patrick, I have to share your story, because he came to the very first summit we hosted in 2023. And his wife, he was like, come on, honey, we got to go. And they flew from Alberta to BC. And it was like this whole weekend thing because she was wanting to see Esther Perel. And, we had an amazing group of speakers that year. And he's this big, tall cowboy, and he comes up to me after the summit and he was like, Robin, I cannot believe what I just experienced. Like, I'm going to take this into my workplace. And I just can't even believe it. He wrote this huge DM to me over Facebook Messenger saying like, I see how I've had this all wrong. Like he's the CEO of like this large company in Alberta. And he was like, I have to do this differently. I have to lead with love. I was like, whoa. Like, and I don't even think anybody said that at the summit. Like we weren't talking about leadership and love during that summit, but I mean, it got him.
Yeah, it was his own wisdom showing up for him.
It's been years, right? And every year he's like, my marriage is different, my home is different, my company is different. People are coming up. And he's like, it is a completely different atmosphere. So, and that's, one man that attended a summit and it just did trickle down. And it's like, and it's, of course, it just grows, right? And changes. I was so amazed.
He was there to receive new signals. And as a result, he started disseminating new signals.
Wow.
Antenna up.
Yeah.
That's why it's not antennaza or antennae. Antenna.
Right.
Yours.
Power of one. I can change, but we can all do it.
Yeah.
Wow.
I understand that it's still a hard pill to swallow for a lot of people, that like compassion for men and boys is the next frontier in love and in culture change. But I know it is.
Yeah.
And we know these men are waiting to be invited to the conversation. Look at this long DM this guy sent you. He felt permission to do so. And so that's, again, you cannot have a boy or spend time with boys and young men and not see their humanity and understand that they have it in them. That we all have everything that we need.
Yes.
We also have to, though, talk about the fact that a lot of parents, educators, coaches are well-intentioned in their messages, right? Yeah. They're well-intentioned. Like, oh, buddy, you can't leave the house in a skirt. Like, you're going to get beat up, right? Like, that is a fear for a parent.
Yeah.
So how do we hold that? How do we hold all of that at once?
Yes.
And I don't have all the answers to this, but that's where we're sitting. That's what Antenna Up is doing, because we both need to change the conversation, but we also need to change the culture around us.
Yes.
Right? As a white person, I didn't grow up thinking that much about race. As a male person, they don't think that much about gender.
Mm.
And more recently, when we talk about gender work or gender equity, it's like, oh, women, LGBTQ. So men haven't seen themselves in any of these conversations, and they don't know why.
This is big work. It's good work.
It's big work. And call me Pollyanna. I've been patted on my head many times as an entrepreneur because I started when I was very young. But this is easier than we think.
Mm-hmm.
This is easier than we think because the human condition is to care and to be connected. We are natural human beings. We are nature, right? So the more that we tune in to how our bodies are responding to things, the more actualized we will be, the better signals we will be sending and receiving. And there are so many men doing this work. There are so many amazing men who've been doing this work, some of them for decades. And because I know how media works, I know that the work has in some ways been actively suppressed. If you are a producer at a major media network and you have a history of abuse, or you know men who abuse their power, or physical abuse, or sexual assault, which is rampant in our country, are you going to book a guest on your show or do a documentary about men's role in preventing violence against women and girls? Are you going to have someone on who holds your feet to the fire and says, how are you taking care of your female employees? How are you creating a safe work environment?
The accountability piece.
The accountability piece. Because all organizations, institutions are compendiums of individual people making individual decisions.
Yes.
All of us on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And we're doing that in ways that either like we think will serve our ego or, there's so many reasons. There's people whose whole study is on decision-making, right? I'm sure we know many of them. But this comes back to consciousness and intentionality and understanding one's own power.
Well, I know the work that we're doing. I know that the world is changing. And I see it even at the summit. Every year, we have more and more men coming. And they're coming because they want to be there. Like the first year, I could see that there's a couple of men that came with their wives, because their wives were like, you've got a company. Yeah. But now it's like every year, more and more.
They felt the magic.
And it
was unavoidable. It was unignorable, I'm sure.
Yeah. And I think it's also just like the consciousness on the planet is going up. And there's more men, there's more talk about men's work. I didn't even know what that was until it wasn't even talked about 4 or 5 years ago.
Exactly.
Right? So things are absolutely it's beautiful to see.
Yeah. Eckhart Tolle says that the evolutionary impulse of the universe is towards consciousness.
Yeah.
Which are the types of things that when we get the buoys together and I have them fill out their buoy barter sheet where they're raising their hands for what they're willing to offer other buoys and what they need in return. And, guys will be like, oh my God, I hang out with buoys on the weekend all the time. Yeah. I have so many more friends. I never knew that, I guess I was just kind of hoping to find other guys who see the world this way. And I didn't realize that that it wasn't just going to happen.
Wow.
People say, I I've ended up clearing my whole day that Buoys Club happens because I want to be so present there. And then I want to like revel in the feeling.
Yeah. Well,
this is men saying these things.
Well, they're coming together in community and they're fine. It's like their own. They're with their people.
Yeah.
You know, heart to heart. Really, that's what it is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's not lost on me or anyone that this work was built by women that came from feminist spaces, that came from professional and personal women's empowerment, because it's part of why we are uniquely positioned to de-risk the conversation, because we have the blessing of people who've done this work, who've been working with women. This isn't a Trojan horse for men's rights. This isn't a male supremacy play disguised as can't we all get along? That's not what this is.
Right. We're trying to make the world a better place.
Yeah,
and for everybody to thrive, like the human thriving, like you said.
We want to make the world a better place, and we know that there's no playbook, but we're going forth regardless, which is what we were just talking about, is charging forth, not having all the answers. And another thing that I say a lot in the personal brand alignment work is that everything is an experiment, if we're being honest.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. That's the fun
Everything
of it.
that happens tomorrow is an experiment, because tomorrow has not happened yet.
Yeah.
It sounds reductive and it sounds kind of silly, but you started this by saying we're zooming out.
Mm-hmm.
And we're zooming out because every new business is an experiment. Every meal you make is an experiment. Democracy is an experiment. We're seeing people evolve their operating system if the old operating system is not serving. And, to continue the computer metaphor or the technology metaphor, we talk a lot about the concept of customizing your defaults, right? We get our phone and it has preset settings to encourage the behavior that the manufacturers want out of us with our phone. We can do the same in our life. So, and that's interrupting impulses, interrupting biases. This is not easy work. I need to say it again and again and again, but it is the work. Yeah. And so when we say, there's no like categorically good guys or bad women or whatever, it's, are we doing the work or are we not doing the work? And that work is the work of being human. And if we can't see each other's humanity.
Beautiful, Janna. So we always ask 2 questions before closing a conversation. And the first is, what is one myth about love that we need to unlearn?
That it has limits.
Yeah. That's good. What would you say is your definition of love?
My definition of love is leadership. Because we have to see ourselves as stewards of our resources, of ourselves. So that's why I go back to, are we sending out love signals? Are we getting love signals? If I'm not getting love signals, how do I set boundaries? We can only control ourselves. So my definition of love is leadership in one's own life and in society. And I would also say that the opposite of love is fear. And we cannot make good decisions when we are afraid. We are not coming from our personal power when we are afraid. And we're very much an ego because we're protecting this, image that we have of ourselves or that we want the world to have of us. And we're protecting it and gripping onto it so much.
Yeah.
That's the fear. And so love is leadership, and love is also freedom and liberation when executed with intention.
Yeah. Oh, this was such a rich conversation. Janna M. Turner, thank you.
Thank you.
The Real Love Ready series is a Soul Print Media production, presented by BetterHelp, hosted by me, Robin Ducharme. Executive producers, Robin Ducharme, John Kim, Tara Malhotra Feinberg, Hilary Swanson. Senior producer, Miriam Debbie Talbot. Producers, Tara Malhotra Feinberg and Maya Anstey. Directed by Miriam Debbie Talbot. Edited by Susie Landers O'Connell. Production coordinator, Leah Schultz. Post sound mixing, Christian Deutsch.